I'm going to talk to you tonight about belief, specifically the problem of religious belief. Our world has been balkanized into separate moral communities. We have Christians against Muslims, against Jews. The majority of people on this planet at the moment organize their lives around a founding proposition that God wrote one of their books. We have many of these books on hand. They make genuinely incompatible claims about the nature of this universe, about the disposition of certain real estate in the Middle East. We have the marriage of quite literally first century or earlier beliefs, literally Iron Age philosophy, with 21st century destructive technology. This on its face should seem untenable to us. I want to bring back this notion of psychopathy because it now strikes me as even more relevant than I thought. So this idea that morality comes merely from the mere issuance of a competent authority. One of the features of psychopathy is an inability to distinguish true moral precepts that relate to the well-being of people and things that merely issue from a competent authority. So if you ask children sitting in a classroom, is it okay to drink a soda in class if the teacher gives you permission? Most of them will say yes. If you ask them, is it okay to punch your neighbor in the face if the teacher gives you permission? They immediately recognize the distinction between a moral infraction and a mere conventional rule. And this is very young children. But children at risk for psychopathy don't. Children at risk for psychopathy think that rules are just given by an authority. So if the teacher tells you can punch a child in the face, you can punch a child in the face. This is, again, I'm not accusing religious people in general of being psychopaths, but there's a psychopathic core to this moral worldview. This divine command theory that Dr. Craig is advocating suggests that if God only tells you to sacrifice your firstborn son, it is good to do it. That's where goodness comes from. And so you've got people waking up in trailer parks all over America suffering some form of mental illness that's destabilized them and made them vulnerable to this way of thinking. And there are people who kill their children thinking they're Abraham who just didn't get interrupted by an angel. And this is the kind of morality that you get out of a divine command theory that, again, offers no retort to the jihadist other than, sorry, Buster, you happen to have the wrong God. The first thing to say up front is just that religious moderation is better than fundamentalism. There's no doubt about that. Religious moderates don't fly planes into buildings. Religious moderates don't organize their lives around apocalyptic prophecy, and that's a very good thing. But religious moderation has some real problems. The first is that it gives cover to fundamentalism. Because religious moderates have made it taboo to criticize faith. They want faith respected. They want the whole project of being religious, being identified as a Christian, a Muslim, a Jew, to be respected. That it is impossible to call into question this basic project, the ethical tenability of raising a child to believe he's a Christian as opposed to anything else. And under the cover of this respect, we are now powerless to say the very harsh and necessary things about religious extremism that we need to say, because it is taboo. You have to respect faith. Religious moderation prevents us from even noticing the differences among our religions. It is taboo to notice that all our religions are not teaching the same thing. They're not all equally wise, and where they do teach the same thing, they don't teach it equally well. I mean, where are the Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers? If you think for a moment that the kind of violence we see in the Muslim world is born of the Israeli occupation and our misadventures in Iraq, we should see Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers. The Tibetans have suffered an occupation every bit as brutal and far more cynical than any that we or the British or the Israelis have imposed upon the Muslim world. Something like 1 million, 1.2 million Tibetans have died since the Chinese occupation? Where are the throngs of Tibetans in the streets calling for the deaths of Chinese non-combatants? Where are the Tibetans blowing themselves up on Chinese buses, at weddings, in crowds of children, in front of the offices of the Red Cross and the UN? It's not happening. It's not likely to happen. It's not that you could not possibly form a death cult out of the principles of Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, to some degree, Zen Buddhism informed the worldview of the kamikaze pilots during World War II. But you would have to work very hard to bend the core principles of Buddhism into this kind of orgy of violence. You don't have to work so hard as a Muslim. And it would be impossible as a Jain. I mean, the Jains, this religion of India that has some 10 million subscribers, I think, the core of their religion is nonviolence. No matter how deranged you get by your doctrine as a Jain, you will get less and less violent. I mean, the really religious Jains cover their mouths with cheesecloth so they don't inhale a bug. By no stretch of the imagination can you argue that the core principle of Islam is nonviolence. It is taboo to notice this, and it is especially taboo among religious moderates. Our own religious demagogues will notice this. We can have, Franklin Graham will stand up and say, Islam is an evil religion. They'll notice the differences between religions. Everyone else has the wrong religion. But religious moderates have rendered this taboo. First, let's start with this claim that any one of our religions is true. There are at least two problems with taking this path. The first is they can't all be true. I mean, this is something that Bertrand Russell pointed out 100 years ago. Even if we knew that one of our religions was perfectly true, I mean, even if we knew this was God's multiple choice exam, is it A, Judaism, B, Christianity, C, Islam? Even if we knew one was perfect, given the bewildering profusion of doctrines on offer, and given their mutual incompatibility, every believer should expect damnation purely as a matter of probability. Now it seems to me this should give religious people pause when they espouse their certainties. It never does, but it should. But the deeper problem with arguing for the truth of any religion is that the evidence for our religions is either non-existent or terrible. And this subsumes all claims about the existence of a personal God, the divine origin of certain books, the virgin birth of certain people, the veracity of ancient miracles. I mean, take Christianity as an example. Christianity is founded on the claim that the gospel account of the miracles of Jesus is true. There are certain Christians that may want to hedge their bet here, but most Christians, most of the time, take some complement of these miracles as true, and most important seems to be the resurrection. Now, the problem with this is that the only thing that testifies to these miracles ever having occurred is the gospel. There's no extra biblical description of these events. Everyone agrees that the Gospels were written decades after the events they report, the earliest Gospels. The problem is that even if the evidence were much better than that, even if we had hundreds of contemporaneous eyewitness accounts of these miracles, that would still not be good enough evidence to cash out the claims of Christianity. Why not? Well, the problem is that in the 21st century, reports of miracles are still quite common. I have met literally hundreds of Western-educated men and women who think that their favorite Hindu or Buddhist guru has magic powers. I mean, these are the reports of miracles are quite current. There are Hindu yogis and mystics who reportedly walk on water and raise the dead and fly without the aid of technology and read minds and divine the future. You take someone like Satya Sai Baba, the South Indian guru. All of these miracles are attributed to him. He even claims to have been born of a virgin. which incidentally is not such a rare claim in the history of religion or in history generally. Genghis Khan was supposedly born of a virgin. Alexander the Great was born of a virgin. I mean, parthenogenesis does not guarantee that you're going to turn the other cheek, apparently. So consider this. Satya Sai Baba has these miracles attributed to him by literally thousands upon thousands of living eyewitnesses. He is not the David Koresh of Hinduism. His devotees threw a birthday party for him a few years ago, and 1 million people showed up. There are millions of people who believe he is a living God. Now, so consider, as though for the first time, the foundational claim of Christianity. The claim is that miracle stories of a sort that surround a person like Satya Sai Baba today, and which are compelling to no one apart from his devotees, suddenly become especially credible if you place them in the pre-scientific religious context of the first century Roman Empire, decades after their supposed occurrence. So Satya Sai Baba's miracles don't even merit an hour on the Discovery Channel. And yet, place these miracles in an ancient text, and half the people on this earth think it a legitimate project to organize their lives around them. Does anyone else see a problem with that? Or take another belief that really this should just be a curiosity to us until you see its consequences in the world. That the Catholic idea that condom use is somehow immoral. This is a genuinely ludicrous idea. I can assure you that the powers of the human brain are insufficient to provide a good argument for this. But map this onto sub-Saharan Africa, where literally millions, something like 3.5, 4 million people, die each year from the spread of AIDS. And what you have there are Catholic ministers literally preaching the sinfulness of condom use in villages where the only information about condom use is the representation of the ministry.
Many people, and especially governments, promote condoms for preventing AIDS. This is a matter of deep concern for us in the Church. The bishops regard the widespread and indiscriminate promotion of condoms as an immoral and misguided weapon in our battle against HIV/AIDS.
I mean, it seems to me that the time for respecting beliefs of this sort is long past. This is genocidal stupidity. It is criminal negligence of a sort that we would not tolerate in any other institution. Yet the Vatican cannot be criticized to the degree that it should, because it's the Vatican, and there is a overarching taboo around criticizing religious faith. We've all assimilated this idea that we should respect other people's religious beliefs. Your neighbor has the right to believe whatever he wants to about God and the moral structure to this universe. He has the right to believe whatever he wants to about what happens after death, and you should respect these beliefs merely because he believes them. Where else in our discourse do we play by these rules? When was the last time anyone in this room was admonished to respect another person's beliefs about history or geography or engineering or medicine? We do not respect people's beliefs. We evaluate their reasons. If my reasons are good enough, you will helplessly believe what I believe. That is what it is to be a rational human being. Reasons are contagious. If I came on this stage and said that the Holocaust never happened, you would be under no burden whatsoever to respect my beliefs. And we don't respect the beliefs of people who think Elvis is still alive, and the people who make all those crazy pilgrimages to Graceland. These people do not get invited to sit on our boards of directors. They don't become presidents of universities. I mean, that is all well and good, except when you change the subject to God, and then all bets are off. Then the sky's the limit. You can be certain with zero evidence and respected for it. It is taboo to push the conversation into criticism of your beliefs. I just want to assure those of you who are religious here that our purpose is not to offend you this morning, but I will nevertheless repay your hospitality by telling you exactly what I think about religion. Now, as someone who spent the last 2 years criticizing religious faith, I've become quite familiar with how people of faith rise to the defense of God. As it turns out, there are not 100 ways of doing this. There appear to be just 3. Either you argue that a specific religion is true, or you argue that religion is useful, or you attack atheism as intolerant, elitist, or otherwise corrosive of basic human values. Now, the only line of argument that is relevant to this debate, or indeed any debate about the validity of religion, is an argument that religion is true. Or rather, that one religion is true, because of course they can't all be true. In fact, our opponents here stand for 2 distinct and mutually incompatible faiths. Was Jesus Christ the Messiah? The rabbi and Dinesh are not likely to agree on that point. As Bertrand Russell pointed out over 100 years ago, even if we knew one of the earth's religions was true, perfectly true, given the multiplicity of faiths, given their mutual incompatibility, all believers should expect damnation purely as a matter of probability. Now, happily, there's absolutely no evidence that the Christian hell exists. And I think we should look at the consequences of believing in this framework, this theistic framework, in this world, and what these moral underpinnings actually would be. All right. 9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they missed the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay. Perhaps you'll remember from the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, they go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle-earth. I say that just as a point of comparison. Okay. So God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay, he engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation. And then he created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Beliefs are not like clothing. Okay? Comfort and utility and attractiveness cannot be our conscious criteria for adopting them. To believe a proposition, you have to believe that you have good reasons for believing it. And the effect that this belief will have on your life cannot be among those reasons. And this is what it is to be clouded by bias. This is why we have phrases like wishful thinking and self-deception. To really believe that there is a God is also to believe that you stand in some relation to his existence, such that if he didn't exist, you wouldn't believe in him. How does the supposed usefulness of religion fit into this scheme? It doesn't. So let's return to this question of truth. It's very common for people to say there's no conflict between religion and science because they relate to different subject matters. Okay, this is a lie. Religion and science both make claims about the way the world is. They make incompatible claims about the same reality, and they make these claims based on very different standards of evidence and modes of argument. It should be quite clear that there is a conflict, a perfect conflict, between demanding good evidence for what you believe and being satisfied with bad evidence or no evidence. So religion and science are in conflict because there's no way to disentangle religious and scientific truth claims. The claim that Jesus was born of a virgin, say, it's a central claim to Christianity. It is also a claim about biology. The claim that he rose from the dead and will return to earth is a claim about history. It's a claim about the human survival of death. It's a claim apparently about human flight without the aid of technology. Jews, Christians, and Muslims, while they disagree on many things, all agree that on the day of judgment, every person who has ever lived will be physically resurrected. Just which scientific laws does this violate? One's tempted to say all of them. If the basic claims of religion are true, science is so blind to this underlying reality, and the laws of nature are so susceptible to supernatural modification as to render the whole enterprise of science ridiculous. If, on the other hand, the basic claims of religion are false, most of the people on this planet are profoundly confused about the nature of reality and beset by quite irrational hopes and fears. And many people are simply wasting their lives and spreading delusion, often with tragic results. It seems to me no thinking person can be indifferent between the two sides of this dichotomy. Now, it's often imagined that non-believers like myself must be in principle closed to spiritual life. This is not true. You can have a deep spiritual and ethical life without lying to yourself or to your children about the nature of reality, without pretending to know things you do not know. There's nothing that prevents a non-believer from experiencing ecstasy and self-transcending love and rapture and awe. In fact, there's nothing that prevents a non-believer from going into a cave and practicing meditation for a year like a proper mystic. What non-believers don't tend to do is make unjustified and unjustifiable claims about the nature of the cosmos and about the divine origin of certain books on the basis of those experiences. That is a difference worth noticing. So I want to suggest to you that whatever is true about our circumstance, ethically and spiritually, can be discovered now and can be talked about in language compatible with our growing scientific understanding of the world and of the human mind. Whatever discoveries are there to be made about how to maximize human well-being can be talked about in language that is not an outright affront to all that we've come to know in the last 2,000 years. And to subscribe to one of the Iron Age religions, like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, is to make the tacit claim that that is impossible, that there is, in fact, no way to understand our circumstance using the tools of our modern understanding of the world, that some measure of superstition is necessary, some measure of mythology, that we have to lie just this much. The point is, we can place our confidence only in human conversation. And the question is, do you want to place it in a 21st century conversation where we have all of the world's literature and learning available to us? Or do you want to place it in a first century conversation or a 7th century conversation as preserved in one of our holy books? Okay, and please notice the double standard that people like Dr. Craig use to exonerate God from all this evil. Okay, we're told that God is loving and kind and just and intrinsically good. But when someone like myself points out the rather obvious and compelling evidence that God is cruel and unjust because he visits suffering on innocent people of a scope and scale that would embarrass the most ambitious psychopath, okay, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, who can understand God's will? Okay, and yet this is precisely, this merely human understanding of God's will is precisely what believers use to establish his goodness in the first place. You know, something good happens to a Christian. He feels some bliss while praying, say, or he sees some positive change in his life, and we're told that God is good. Okay, but when children by the tens of thousands are torn from their parents' arms and drowned, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, this is how you play tennis without the net. Okay, and I want to suggest to you that it is not only tiresome when otherwise intelligent people speak this way, it is morally reprehensible. I'm curious, how many of you consider yourselves to be devout Muslims? See a show of hands. Don't mean to single anyone out, but not many. Now, you're all aware, of course, that the Quran exists and claims to be the perfect word of the creator of the universe. You're aware that once having heard of this possibility and rejecting it, you're all going to hell for eternity. I mean, needless to say, Dr. Craig and I are both going to hell if this vision of life is true. The problem is that everything Dr. Craig has said tonight, with a few modifications, could be said in defense of Islam. In fact, has been said in defense of Islam. Okay, the logic is exactly the same. We have a book that claims to be the word of the creator of the universe. It tells us about the nature of moral reality and how to live within it. But what if Muslims are right? And what if Islam is true? Okay, how should we view God in moral terms? How would we view God in moral terms? Or I should say Allah. Okay, we have been born in the wrong place, to the wrong parents, given the wrong culture, given the wrong theology. Okay, needless to say, Dr. Craig is doomed. He's been thoroughly confused by Christianity. I mean, just appreciate what a bad position he's now in to appreciate the true Word of God. I've been thoroughly misled by science. Okay, where is Allah's compassion? Okay. And yet, he's omnipotent. He could change this in an instant. He could give us a sign that would convince everyone in this room. And yet he's not going to do it. And hell awaits. And hell awaits our children because we can't help but mislead our children. Okay, now just hold this vision in mind. And first appreciate how little sleep you have lost over this possibility. Okay? Just feel in yourself at this moment how carefree you are and will continue to be in the face of this possibility. What are the chances that we're all going to go to hell for eternity because we haven't recognized the Quran to be the perfect word of the creator of the universe? Please know that this is exactly how Christianity appears to someone who's not been indoctrinated by it. Well, as we've begun to see, one of the problems with arguing in defense of God is that the evidence in your favor is either terrible or non-existent. What we've heard from the other side and from the middle is that science is so complicated and counterintuitive and obviously incomplete that this leaves room for the God of Abraham. Okay, that's basically the argument. That the scientists don't understand everything. We don't understand how the first complex molecules self-assembled. Indeed, we don't. Scientists are the first to admit when they don't know. So the arrogance is very much on the side of those who would put their Iron Age faith in the place of genuine scientific ignorance. Now, the other side has been playing hide the ball with the articles of faith. Okay, let's be very clear about this. I I will speak about Christianity specifically just for ease. Christianity is based on the notion that the gospel account of the miracles of Jesus is true. Okay, this is what you have to reject Christianity. You don't have to prove the universe to be absent of God. You don't have to, in the same way that you don't have to go find that Poseidon or Zeus or any of the thousands of other dead gods are absent from the universe. With Christianity, it is a textual claim about the veracity of the Bible. Consider what this amounts to. Bible scholars agree that the first Gospels were written decades after the life of Jesus. Decades. And of course, we don't have the original manuscripts. We have copies of copies of copies of ancient Greek manuscripts, which have thousands, literally thousands of discrepancies between them, many of which show signs of later interpolation, which is to say that people added passages that then became part of the canon. There are whole books of the canon, like the book of Revelation, which for hundreds of years were not included because they were deemed false gospel. There are other whole books, like the Shepherd of Hermas, which you probably haven't heard of, but for centuries it was considered part of the canon and then was later jettisoned as false gospel. Generations of Christians lived and died being guided by gospel that is now deemed both incomplete and mistaken. Think about that. So this process, this all too human process of cobbling together the supposed authoritative word of God, is a very precarious basis to assert the claims of Christianity. But the truth is, even if we had multiple contemporaneous claims of the miracles of Jesus, this would not be good enough, because miracle stories abound even in the 21st century. The devotees of the South Indian guru Satya Sai Baba ascribe all of the miracles of Jesus to him. He reads minds, he foretells the future, he raises the dead, he was born of a virgin. Okay, Satya Sai Baba is not a fringe figure. You might not have heard of him, but they had a birthday party for him a few years ago, and 1 million people showed up. There are vast numbers of people who think he's a living God. Okay, so Christianity is predicated on the claim that miracle stories, exactly of the kind that today surround a person like Satya Sai Baba, become especially credible when you place them in the pre-scientific religious context of the first century Roman Empire, decades after their supposed occurrence, as attested to by copies of copies of copies of ancient Greek and largely discrepant manuscripts. We have Satya Sai Baba's miracle stories attested to by thousands upon thousands of living eyewitnesses, and they don't even merit an hour on cable television. And yet you put a few miracle stories in an ancient book, and half the people on earth think it a legitimate project to organize their lives around them. Does anyone else see a problem with that? Now, I'm obviously not saying that Dr. Craig or all religious people are psychopaths and psychotics, but this to me is the true horror of religion. It allows perfectly decent and sane people to believe by the billions what only lunatics could believe on their own. Okay, if you wake up tomorrow morning thinking that saying a few Latin words over your pancakes is going to turn them into the body of Elvis Presley, okay, you have lost your mind. Okay. But if you think more or less the same thing about a cracker and the body of Jesus, you're just a Catholic. And I'm not the first person to notice that it's a very strange sort of loving God who would make salvation depend on believing in him on bad evidence. Well, I want to return to this core issue, which is belief, because that really is the issue. Without belief, religion evaporates. Without belief, science evaporates. We're talking about claims and their evidence. And we're talking about what you think is true about the nature of the universe. Presumably you don't believe in Zeus. If someone stood here and said Zeus was the greatest scientist, you would not have applauded. Okay, let's talk honestly about what we think is true. The truth is that religion, as we speak of it, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, is based on the claim that God dictates certain books. He doesn't code software, he doesn't produce films, he doesn't score symphonies, he is an author. And this claim has achieved credibility because these books are deemed so profound that they could not possibly have been written by human authors. Please consider for a moment how differently we treat scientific claims and texts and discoveries. Isaac Newton went into isolation for 18 months, starting in the year 1665. When he came out of his solitude, he had invented the calculus. He had discovered the laws of motion and universal gravitation. He had single-handedly created the field of optics. No one thinks that this was anything other than a man's labor. And it took 200 years of continuous ingenuity on the part of some of the smartest people who ever lived to substantially improve upon Newton's work. How difficult would it be to improve the Bible? Anyone in this room could improve this supposedly inerrant text scientifically, historically, ethically, spiritually, in moments. If God loves us and wanted to guide us with a book of morality, it's very strange to have given us a book that supports slavery, that demands that we murder people for imaginary crimes like witchcraft. The true basis for hope in our world is open-ended conversation, and religion has shattered our world into competing moral communities. What we have to convince ourselves of is that love and curiosity is enough for us, and intellectual honesty is the guardian of that.
What's to prevent you from going out and committing murder if you don't believe in God? What do you say to people who insist that there can never be any morality without religion?
Well, yeah, as you say, this is an incredibly common question, and we're all wise to prepare an answer for it. I happen to have one. One counterpoint to this suspicion is, just look at the societies where there's the least homicide, the least violent crime. These really are the most atheistic societies on the planet. If you just look at the UN Development Index, which ranks societies by violent crime, by literacy, by educational attainment, by per capita income, without exception, apart from the presence of the United States somewhere in the top 20, these are the most atheistic societies on the planet. Societies like the Netherlands and Canada and Australia, Sweden. There is no evidence whatsoever that high levels of religious adherence leads to a moral society. In fact, if you look at within our own culture, if you look at the red state, blue state divide, where are most of the murders occurring? Where are most of the teen pregnancies even, and even the abortions? These are happening in those states that have the highest level of religious adherence. Strangely, the reason people rise to the defense of God is not that there's so much evidence that God exists, but that they believe that belief in God is the only intellectual framework for an objective morality. And clearly Dr. Craig is among their number. Now, the sense is that without the conviction that moral truths exist, that words like right and wrong and good and evil actually mean something, humanity will just lose its way. That's the fear, and I actually share that fear. I've come to believe that this concern that many religious people have of the erosion of secular morality is not an entirely empty one. Now, I once spoke at an academic meeting on these themes, and I said, as I will say tonight, that once we understand morality in terms of human well-being, we'll be able to make strong claims about which behaviors and ways of life are good for us and which aren't. And I cited as an example the sadism and misogyny of the Taliban as an example of a worldview that was less than perfectly conducive to human flourishing. And it turns out that to denigrate the Taliban at a scientific meeting is to court controversy. Mm-hmm. And after my remarks, I fell into debate with another invited speaker. And this is more or less exactly how our conversation went. She said, "How could you ever say that forcing women to wear burqas is wrong from the point of view of science?" I said, well, because I think it's pretty clear that right and wrong relate to human well-being, and it's just as clear that forcing half the population to live in cloth bags and beating them or killing them when they try to get out is not a way of maximizing human well-being. And she said, well, that's just your opinion. And I said, okay, well, let's make it even easier. Let's say we found a culture that was literally removing the eyeballs of every third child, okay, at birth. Would you then agree that we had found a culture that was not perfectly maximizing human well-being? And she said it would depend on why they were doing it. So after my eyebrows returned from the back of my head, I said, okay, well, let's say they're doing it for religious reasons. Let's say they have a scripture which says every third should walk in darkness, or some such nonsense. Okay. And then she said, well, then you could never say that they were wrong. Okay, and so you should know, I was talking to someone who has a deep background in science and philosophy. She's actually since been appointed to the President's Council on Bioethics. She's one of 13 people advising President Obama on all of the ethical implications of advances in medicine and related science and technology. And she had just delivered a perfectly lucid lecture on the moral implications of neuroscience for the courts. And she was especially concerned that we could be subjecting captured terrorists to lie detection neuroimaging technology. And she viewed this as really an unconscionable violation of cognitive liberty. So on the one hand, her moral scruples were very finely calibrated to recoil from the slightest perceived misstep in ethical terms in our war on terror. And yet she was quite willing to forgive some primitive culture its fondness for removing the eyeballs of children in its religious rituals. And she seemed to me quite terrifyingly detached from the very real suffering of millions of women in Afghanistan at this moment. So I see this double standard as a problem. And strangely, this is precisely the erosion of basic common sense that many religious people are worried about. I hope it'll be clear to you at the end of this hour that religion is not an answer to this problem. Okay, belief in God is not only unnecessary for a universal morality, it is itself a source of moral blindness. I think kids, unless they're conditioned otherwise, don't come into this world believing themselves to be Christians or Muslims or Jews. I mean, we give them these ideas. They don't just pluck them out of the ether. And so it seems to me that simply giving honest answers to their questions, and certainly lifting this taboo of saying, I don't know. I mean, we're so reluctant to say, I don't know. And incidentally, scientists are the people who are really good at saying, I don't know. They say, I don't know all the time because they're terrified that some specialist is going to be in the room who knows so much more about what they've been asked that, you can almost never get a scientist to weigh in on anything but his most narrow area of specialization. And this is slightly off topic, but notice the fact that science is paying a price for this, in that fundamentalists are really good at using the candor of science against it. I mean, whenever scientists say, I don't know, on Larry King Live, therein rush 1,000 fundamentalists, giving us the God of the gaps there. And that's really what intelligent design is. It is politics and religion masquerading as science. Now, it's widely believed that there are two quantities in this universe. There are facts on the one hand, and of course science can give us our most rigorous discussion of these. But then there are values, which many people, like Dr. Craig, think science can't touch. Okay, questions of meaning and morality and what life is good for. Now, of course, everyone thinks that science can help us get what we value, okay, but it can never tell us what we ought to value. Okay, and therefore it cannot, in principle, be applied to the most important questions in human life. Questions like how we should raise our children, or what constitutes a good life. Now, it's thought, from the point of view of science, and Dr. Craig just gave voice to this opinion, that when we look at the universe, all we see are patterns of events. Just one thing follows another. Okay, and there's no corner of the universe that declares certain of its events to be good or evil, or right or wrong. Apart from us, I mean, our minds, we declare certain events to be better than others. But in doing that, it seems that we're merely projecting our own preferences and desires onto a reality that is intrinsically value-free. And where do our notions of right and wrong come from? Well, clearly they've been drummed into us by evolution. They're the product of these apish urges and social emotions. And then they get modulated by culture. You take sexual jealousy, for instance. I mean, this is an attitude that has been bred into us over millions of years. Okay, our ancestors were highly covetous of one another. despite the fact that everyone was covered with hair and had terrible teeth. And this possessiveness now gets enshrined in various cultural institutions like the institution of marriage. Okay, so therefore, a statement like, it's wrong to cheat on one's spouse, okay, seems a mere summation of these contingencies. It seems like it's an improvisation on the back of biology. It seems that from the point of view of science, it can't really be wrong to cheat on your spouse. Okay, this is just how apes like ourselves worry when we learn to worry with words. Okay, now here is where religious people, like Dr. Craig, begin to get a little queasy, as I think they should. Okay? And many see no alternative but to insert the God of Abraham, an Iron Age God of war, into the clockwork as an invisible arbiter of moral truth. Okay? It is wrong to cheat on your spouse because Yahweh deems that it is so. Okay, which is curious, because in other moods, Yahweh is perfectly fond of genocide and slavery and human sacrifice. I'm actually not a fan, and I've received some heat for this, I'm not a fan of words like secularism and atheism. I don't think we have to name the counterpoint to religious irrationality. We don't have words to describe not being an astrologer or not being an alchemist. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm not an astrologer, I'm not an astrologer. and to some degree, I think the same will work for not being duped by the false certainties of religion. We simply need to apply reason. There are two very different kinds of conversations we could have here. We can talk about religion as it is, for most people most of the time, and we can talk about what religion could be, or should be, or perhaps what it is for the tiniest minority of people. And I just want you to be aware of the difference there, because it could get lost. It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness, or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it, because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. He is a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to, but he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality. And he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence? Which is to say, on faith. And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah, and you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God. We can talk about anything we want. I'm happy to talk about consciousness, but please notice that when we migrate away from the God that is really shaping human events, or the God talk that is really shaping human events in our world at this moment. We are really prisoners of literature right now. We are constrained to talk either explicitly about these books or in some vague conformity to these books. And these books were written by people who every person in this room has more access to information and scientific knowledge and just what is now basic common sense than the authors of the Bible and the Quran. And in fact, there's not a person in this room who has ever met a person whose worldview is as narrow, just by the sheer time in which they appeared in history, as the worldviews of Abraham or Moses or Jesus or Muhammad. And until we grapple with that fact and honestly talk about honestly commit ourselves to a 21st century conversation about the possibilities of human well-being, we're just going to be at sea, and we're going to be trying to figure out whether we should pass laws about gay marriage and whether we should ban blasphemy at the UN and whether we should allow newspapers to print cartoons about the Prophet Muhammad. And we're going to just be bewildered by the relentless certainties of people who are obviously lying to themselves. And there are many people having these remarkable experiences in every traditional context. That, in and of itself, proves that all of these religions are wrong. All of these religions claim their exclusive validity. And the fact that you have Christians having deep experiences of peace, and you have Muslims, and you have atheists, and you have Buddhists, it proves that there's a deeper principle that should be talked about in a non-sectarian way that is not held hostage by Iron Age literature. I mean, that... Okay,
no, that's a very important point.
We need a scientific discourse on the possibilities of human well-being.
Sure.
And you can get as esoteric as you want there. You can talk about self-transcendence. You can talk about the ego being an illusion. You can ask, what is the relationship between consciousness and the rest of the physical world? And the truth is, when you get out to some of those fringe areas, you are getting to an area of real scientific ignorance. And the first thing you want to do in the spirit of intellectual honesty is admit ignorance, not claim that you, by closing your eyes, can realize your identity with the entire cosmos and the origin of you go get before the Big Bang with your unguarded intuitions. You talked about these great wisdom traditions that he is so callously dismissed out of his own ignorance. You go to these great wisdom traditions, right? And you consult. I mean, and you're talking about changing the story. And so, what does it mean to change the story in Islam? Let's just talk about facts. You open the Quran. In the 4th chapter, it says disobedient wives should be whipped by their husbands. Okay, so this is what
it says that in the Old Testament, all kinds of things. It says that
absolutely
in
does.
the Hindu book
Deepak, I'm just picking Islam as an example.
Why? It's true of all religions.
Okay, then I can pick Judaism. Would you be more comfortable if I pick Judaism as an example? It's the same. Yes, all of these books are litanies of barbarous practices. But the point is that the way Muslims are now constrained to change the story is they can't change the Quran. The Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe. They have to parse the word whipped, and the most enlightened of them have to say things like, well, it doesn't actually mean you take out the bullwhip and you whip her. It could be a kind of a ceremonial kind of a patting, just a brief chastisement that doesn't actually hurt. And so you get a range, but nowhere in that range do you get real equity and real compassion and real understanding between the sexes. And to get that, you have to admit, okay, this is barbarous nonsense that we should just disregard. And religion doesn't give you the tools to do that. And God talk is either profoundly misleading or unhelpful, or it's just part of the problem. People want to be happy. They know the difference between happiness and suffering. They want to feel a part of a community. They want to feel the best they've ever felt and better than they've ever felt. And they constantly notice that life makes that difficult. And our spiritual traditions are a response to that circumstance, and our beliefs, the beliefs that console us about what happens after death, are obviously a response to that circumstance. I mean, your child dies, what you're immediately confronted with is, what can I now do to not suffer this way for the rest of my life? And one thing people have found to do is tell each other a story that death is an illusion, that we all get together at the right hand of Jesus after we die. That does the trick for a lot of people, and people are mightily attached to that story. But that story is really both it's in its products and in the way of getting there, the antithesis of the scientific frame of mind. And we just can't conflate them. And we have to notice when we're lying to ourselves and when we're lying to our children. And we have to notice that there's a liability to pretending to know things we don't know.
Don't you feel that a belief in God is, from a neurochemical or structural basis, inevitable?
Well, apparently not. I've got a sample of at least one that I'm pretty sure about.
Secondarily, based on our need for tribes and society, don't you feel that, again, the belief that there is no God is going to, from our own structured creation, not discussing what the cause of that creation was, but don't you feel that we're just biased in such a way that in society we will always have the belief in God as the major belief, and the belief that there is no God as a minor and presently not very vocal understanding?
Yeah, it's an interestingly provincial point of view. That we're in America, which is almost functionally a theocracy. But in Western Europe, your question actually wouldn't make sense right now. I mean, it is a massively secular part of the world, and if you go to Scandinavia, it flips entirely. It's something like a majority, 60 to, depending on how you ask the question, 60 to 80% of people in Denmark, for instance, are atheists. I mean, they do not believe, they treat the God of Abraham the way we treat Zeus. And that is, just refresh the browser in your brain and realize that those are actually equivalent. And we are in a shocking circumstance where most people in our society are really worried about Zeus. And you pick up the New York Times tomorrow, and I guarantee you that the international section of the paper will more or less read like, what are the crazy Muslims doing today? And if you realize that what they're doing is on the basis of a belief that is just like a belief in the gods of Mount Olympus. I mean, imagine if you drawing cartoons of Hercules could get you killed.
It seems to me that if you want to find intolerance, you look for atheistic regimes. Would you rather live in North Korea or South Korea?
Okay.
South Korea is Christian.
Don't
North
answer
Korea is
that
communist.
question.
Well, you cited many examples in your book.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, this is a trick, and this is one of the reasons why
It's not a trick.
I'm not a fan of the term atheism. I mean, atheism is a term totally without content. It's like being a non-astrologer. I mean, we don't have a word for someone who's not an astrologer. And if astrologers suddenly became ascendant in our society, we wouldn't need to invent non-astrology as a discipline. We could talk about reason and science and evidence and common sense and bullshit, and put astrologers in their place. And so it could be with religion. And so this notion that Stalin and Hitler and Pol Pot were doing what they did because of atheism, because of non-belief in God. I mean, ask yourself, is too much skeptical inquiry really what's wrong with North Korea? I mean, the North Koreans are a cargo cult armed with nuclear weapons right now. They think that the food aid that we give them is a devotional offering to the genius of their dear leader. They are systematically impoverished, both physically and in terms of information. Too much knowledge, any knowledge is too much knowledge in North Korea. This is not a paradise of reasonableness. Now, all I'm advocating is that we use the same standards of rationality that we use in every other area of our lives when people start making claims about the divine origin of certain books and the virgin birth of certain people and the glorious end to history where the good people will be raptured into the sky. These are the kinds of things that we should apply pressure to. And it is taboo to apply pressure to these claims. And religious moderation, unfortunately, ramifies that taboo.
I want to say, in other words, that religion is the outcome of unresolved contradictions in the material world. That if you make the assumption that it's man-made, then very few things are mysterious to you. If you make the assumption that religion is man-made, then you would know why, it would be obvious to you why, there are so many religions. When you make the assumption that it's man-made, you will understand why it is that religion has been such a disappointment to our species, that despite innumerable revivals, innumerable attempts again to preach the truth, innumerable attempts to convert the heathen, innumerable attempts to send missionaries all around the world, that the same problems remain with us, that nothing is resolved by this, that if all religions died out, or all were admitted to be false, instead of, as all believers will tell you, only some of them are false. In other words, we're faced with the preposterous proposition that religion are either all of them true, or none of them true, or only one exclusive preachment is true. And none of these seem to me coherent, and all of these seem to be the outcome of a man-made cult. Assume that all of them were discredited at the same time, all of our problems would be exactly what they are now. How do we live with one another? Where indeed do morals and ethics come from? What are our duties to one another? How shall we build the just city? How shall we practice love? How shall we deal with the baser, what Darwin called the lowly stamp of our original origins, which comes not from a pact with the devil or an original sin, but from our evolution as well. All these questions, ladies and gentlemen, would remain exactly the same. Emancipate yourself from the idea of a celestial dictatorship, and you've taken the first step to becoming free.
One thing to notice is that the dialogue between science and religion has gone this way. It has been one of relentless and one-directional erosion of religious authority. I would challenge anyone here to think of a question upon which we once had a scientific answer, however inadequate, but for which now the best answer is a religious one. Now you can think of an uncountable number of questions that run the other way, where we once had a religious answer, and now the authority of religion has been battered and nullified by science and by moral progress and secular progress generally. And I think that's not an accident. And the one area where religion still seems to hold its ground is now under assault by science, and it's very good that it is under assault by science. And this is the whole issue of morality and human happiness and what constitutes the good life. These are, and let me just tell you why I think this is a scientific question. Even the place of science is ultimately a scientific question. Because surely there are objective facts to be learned about the basis of human happiness. The moment you recognize that morality and spirituality and value is a matter of happiness and suffering, and that we're moving suffering in the direction of happiness, then you realize that if there are objective facts to know about human happiness, and surely there are facts about the way that genes and ideas and uses of attention and economic systems, social structures, all of these conspire to make us happy or miserable. And again, it's true that scientific discourse is just in the beginning of addressing these issues. But it's not too soon to say that love is better than hate in terms of ethics. And we are studying these things at the level of the brain. Eventually, we will understand the brain basis of love and hate and the kinds of mechanisms, both cultural and personal, that ramify these states of mind. And there will be right and wrong answers. And we'll find, for instance, that honor killing is a bad strategy if you want to raise compassionate men. We know that already, but at some point we will know this biochemically.
It could be true, but you'd have to imagine, let's say the human species has been, Homo sapiens has been with us. Some people say as long as 250,000 years. Some say 200, some say 100,000. Francis Collins and Richard Dawkins oscillate about this. It's not a very big argument. I'll just take 100,000, if you like. You have to imagine that human beings are born. Well, actually, most of them, a good number of them aren't born. They die in childbirth or don't long outlive it. They're born into a terrifying world of the unknown. Everything is a mystery to them, everything from disease to volcanic eruptions. Everything is, their life expectancy for the first, I don't know, many tens of thousands of years would be lucky to be in the 20s, probably dying agonizingly over their teeth, poorly evolved as the teeth are, and from other inheritances from being primates, such as the appendix that we don't need, such as the fact that our genitalia appear to have been designed by a committee, other shortcomings of the species, exaggerated by scarcity, by war, by famine, by competition, and so on. And for 98,000 years or so, heaven watches this with complete indifference. And then we know where your children go to school, by the way. Heaven watches this with total indifference, and then, with 2,000 years to go on the clock, thinks, actually, it's time we intervened. We can't go on like this. Why don't we have someone tortured to death in Bronze Age Palestine? That should teach them. That should give them the chance of redemption. You're free to believe that, but I think the designer who thought of doing it that way was a very cruel, capricious, random, bungling, and incompetent one. The news of this, Dr. Craig talks as if, okay, but since then, there have been more people born, so it might have been a good time in terms of population growth. Well, there are a huge number of people in the world who still haven't even heard of this idea. The news hasn't penetrated to them. Or where it has, it's been brought to them by people who Dr. Craig doesn't think of as Christians, such as Mormons, for example. And it's taught to them in many discrepant and competitive and indeed incompatible and violently irreconcilable ways. And there's been a lot of argument in the church and the churches all this time about, well, okay, what is the answer to that? What about all the people who never could have heard the good news, or who never will hear it, or still haven't been reached by it, and who've died not knowing about it? What happens to them? How can they be saved? Well, the argument is that it's all somehow made retrospective. And with so many of these arguments, I just comment on these, well, how convenient. Because if you're willing to make assumptions of this kind, then really evidence is only ancillary to what you are advancing.
Science is the one language game we are playing where we get really straight and rigorous about what constitutes evidence, where there's a process of peer review, where you have a lot of smart people trying to prove you wrong, and where you actually win points by proving yourself wrong. And this is not what religions are up to. Religions are not falsifiable in this way.